going to get a 7,000 rupee thali to try.
Average Indian is fed 5 hours a day of curated images of luxury, and naturally the average Indian is loading up on debt to live the good life. So we have become the most indebted middle class in the world.
Tell us, why is the middle class so bambooed?
In the post-91 world, this is the first time we've run out of jobs. Real wages, salaries after adjusting for inflation, have stopped growing in India over the last 6-7 years. But between 5 lakhs to a crore, at that exact band, which is our definition of middle class, household incomes are frozen solid for the last 10 years.
But the debt thing, actually, when I read about it in your book, it kind of shocked me.
In this world of hyper-connected social media, a lot of people feel that everybody else's lives are perfect.
Great.
I too am the guy who's completely shafted, but that's because it's me. I also have to go on that holiday to Mauritius, because otherwise, how will I show my face at the Diwali party?
I think for millennials or maybe even boomers growing up, a loan was an act of shame.
Youngsters in their 20s and 30s who have taken 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 700 personal loans. That was the record I've met.
700 personal loans.
His point was 670 to chuka dunga main, baki 30 ka pata nahi. Right? So
you say that the middle class, they don't have a lot of political leverage.
So the middle class neither represents voting power nor represents money power, and hence why should a politician really kill himself trying to look after this constituency?
Indians actually have a very unusual system where we waste years of our 20s studying for these exams, studying for competitive exams, studying for the IAS exam.
In fact, I did the maths. You're more likely to win the Maharashtra state lottery than to land a seat in one of these entrance exams. The economics of the middle class is so removed from the lived reality of their existence today, the way they are enacting their lives, that gap is enormous.
The Indian middle class is in a grave crisis, so grave that it threatens the country's post-1991 development model. That's the thesis of investor Saurabh Mukherjea, which he's laid out in his new book, Breakpoint. Hi Saurabh, welcome to Scroll Adda.
Thank you, thanks Shoaib. Thank you for having me here.
Tell us, why is the middle class so bambooed? Why do you think so?
So I think 3 things have happened in India in the last 5 years, in the post-COVID world. 3 things have happened in India. These 3 things do not have a precedence in India. The first is that in the post-91 world, this is the first time we've run out of jobs. So in Breakpoint, we have laid out lots of data, credible data to our mind, which shows that in the last 3 years, job creation, white-collar job creation to be precise, Shoaib, white-collar job creation has come to a standstill in our country, right? So that's the first big issue, which I think afflicts the viewers of this podcast. Second issue is 80 lakh graduates are coming out of the university system every year. So naturally, if year after year there's very few jobs, there's an excess supply of graduates in the markets, and basic economics dictates that intelligent employers will say, if there's an excess supply of talent, let me squeeze wages. And that's what we show in Breakpoint, again using credible data from multiple sources, such as the income tax department, such as the stock market, that real wages, salaries after adjusting for inflation, have stopped growing in India over the last 6-7 years. Right? So middle class wages have stopped growing in India. In fact, real wages are shrinking at the rate of 4 to 5% per annum, right? That's the second challenge.
And when you say real wages, just for our viewers, it means adjusted for inflation.
Salaries adjusted for inflation.
Once you take inflation into account, actually our salaries are
shrinking,
falling.
Right. Falling, absolutely. Okay. Third piece, right? We are a country where we have basically free mobile data, right? Cost of mobile data in India is 1/40th that of the Western world. We are one of the youngest demographies ever. Median Indian is 29 years old. And as everybody watching this knows, we're an incredibly unequal society. So we are 3% of world GDP. We have 11% of the world's billionaires. The city I live in, Mumbai, has the 4th most number of dollar billionaires in the world, right? Now, if you combine these, that's a recipe for social media becoming via media for young people who have very little money to see the good things in the world. So the average Indian is fed curated images for 5 hours a day. Average Indian is fed 5 hours a day of curated images of luxury, whether it's IPL stars or Bollywood stars. And naturally, the average Indian, even though he doesn't earn much and his salary is going down and there are very few jobs, is loading up on debt to live the good life. So we have become the most indebted middle class in the world. household debt, excluding home loans, household debt as a percentage of income is 32%. No other large economy is above 22%. So three things: very few jobs, wage compression, and enormous amounts of household debt. And that's why we gave the title Breakpoint, because when we published this book in March 2026, we said this is simply unsustainable. We expected things to crack, and I think, in all modesty, things are cracking on multiple fronts in front of us as these three forces bear down upon the Indian economy.
And just to, we'll go deeper into this, but the debt thing, actually, when I read about it in your book, it kind of shocked me. The fact that Indians are so indebted is something that I was not actually aware of.
The fact that it's not a daily issue. I find it fascinating that people are loading up. The RBI is publishing data set after data set saying this is unprecedented load up of debt, and nobody seems to think it's an issue. People think this is just fine, that per capita household debt is growing at 21-22%, and nobody in the country thinks that's a problem.
Before we go into the weeds though, I want you to tell us, when you say middle class, what do you mean by middle class?
So the conventional definition, Shoaib, before our book came along, the conventional definition was lower bound of the middle class was seen as 5 lakhs per annum income, and the upper bound was seen as somewhere between 25 to 30 lakhs. Right? I found that definition suboptimal, and our economist Nandita, who's co-authored the book with me, she came up with a neater, cleverer definition of the middle class. So our definition of the middle class fulfills two different criteria. The first is it obviously has to be in the middle. So there's an income distribution. The elite are at one end, the low income people at the other end. The middle class by definition has to be in the middle. That's obvious. But we felt a more demanding criteria also has to be fulfilled, which is that the middle class should account for at least half of the income earned in the country. Right. Otherwise, what's the point of writing a book and jumping up and down about the middle class, right? So if you start the lower bound at 5 lakhs and stop it at 30 lakhs, it ain't going to include half the income in our country. And why not? Because we have all those billionaires sitting at the top end dragging up the upper bound. So if you want to include at least 50% of India's earned income as declared to the authorities, you need to drag up the upper bound, not to 50 lakhs, you have to drag it to 1 crore. So 5 lakhs per annum. 5 lakhs to 1 crore per annum is our definition of the middle class. And fascinatingly, right, we came up with the definition first to satisfy these two criteria. Once we came up with it and we looked at the income tax data, right, my jaw dropped, because what you can see very clearly in the income tax data is below 5 lakhs, there is income growth in the country, right? Kudos to the government, direct benefit transfer, giving money to the poor. It's working. It's worked. It's clearly worked. It's worked in the polls. It's worked in the income tax data. Above 1 crore, you have unprecedented growth in household income, right? In fact, above 100 crores, unprecedented growth in household income. But between 5 lakhs to 1 crore, at that exact band, which is our definition of middle class, household incomes are frozen solid for the last 10 years, right? So we then said, well, this is income tax data. I published a blog on it just to see what the response was. And a lot of people criticized it, saying, "Arey, the moron hai. He's not realizing that the dude on 5 lakhs, he's actually moving to 8 lakhs. There's some dude on 2 lakhs who's moving to 5 lakhs. As a result, there's churn within the 5 lakhs to 1 crore. We said, okay, that's a fair point. So what we then did was we took the 50 largest listed companies, Shoaib. We took their annual reports, we took their wage bill, we took their number of employees, we calculated the average wage or the average salary paid by the 50 largest employers in India as per the stock market, the 50 largest companies in India, their wage bill, average wage bill. And we took the same 50 companies and we went back in time 10 years and we found the same thing. That whether you take the income tax data or the large listed entities, salaries ain't moving by much. Cost of living is rising anywhere between 5 to 9% a year, and therefore in real terms, wages are falling at around 5% a year, right? So that 5 lakhs to 1 crore definition ended up therefore fulfilling three different things. It's the middle of the income spectrum. It accounts for at least half of income earned in the country, and uniquely, remarkably, it's the only part of the income distribution curve where there is no movement in salaries.
Right. And I want to dig into what you said right now. You said that the government has done well for the Indian poor. And I think that's kind of, in a way, uncontroversial, mainly because of direct benefit transfers. The poor in India are actually somewhat richer than they were maybe a decade back.
That data, I think, is coming pretty steadily, pretty clearly from the income tax data for the last 10, 15 years.
I guess. And maybe I think it's even coming through in things like consumption surveys and so on. I
Yes,
think
yeah,
it does exist.
yeah.
And of course, the hyper-rich in India have it very good. We are
So the K-shaped piece,
K-shaped thing. Yeah.
This piece was known. What Breakpoint brings to the table is the sheer extent of the crunch on the middle of the K.
In the middle.
Right? The fact the middle of the K is not sitting still, the fact that the middle of the K is actually regressing in terms of real income, that the middle of the K is getting increasingly burdened with enormous amounts of household debt. I don't think that piece has been made clear. And it's only now, I think, post-Breakpoint, post books like ours, and I would love to see other people also write on this subject because I think it's an important subject. This constituency, the middle of the K, has historically accounted for 70% of India's income tax collection. It's accounted for between 40 to 50% of the GST collections. This constitutes almost the entirety of the white-collar office workforce. This constitutes the entirety of the intelligentsia, right? So a lot of the world that we live in, a lot of the world that the viewers of this podcast live in is the middle of the K. And the data, to my mind, is clear that the middle of the K is under unprecedented pressure on jobs, on wages, on debt. I'm not even getting into the emotional aspects of their lives because that's a subject outside my domain of competence.
One of the reasons that you blame for this crunch is you say that the middle class or this white collar band from 5 lakhs to 1 crore, they don't have a lot of political leverage. You constantly make this point throughout your book. Do you want to expand on that? What does that mean?
So let me make the uncontroversial points first because that's where I feel a little bit more confident. The uncontroversial point we make is that if you look at the demographics of our country, roughly 100 crore voters, of which only about 4 crore income taxpayers fall in this 5 lakhs to 1 crore income band. Okay? So if I'm a politician and I can see that, look, out of 100 crore voters, these guys are 4 crore income taxpayers, I'm really not going to kill myself looking after this constituency because this constituency neither represents a vote bank. And in fact, to be fair, many people in my socioeconomic strata go on holiday on election day. Right? So as it is, there are very few in number. They don't represent much of a vote bank. And secondly, the way across the world democratic politics has evolved, significant donations are required to fund elections. Then those donations don't come from the middle class either. So the middle class neither represents voting power nor represents money power, and hence why should a politician really kill himself trying to look after this constituency? So that's the uncontroversial point. I don't think I'm saying something revolutionary there. I think this is just common sense. But where reading up on what other people have said, not just for India, elsewhere in the world, it also seems to be the case that there is no one middle class voice or point of view, right? So even if you take the specific housing society or building I live in Mumbai, if the local politician were to come and ask us what would we want, I suspect 1/3 of the building will say stray street dogs. That's the big issue.
Right.
Another 1/3 will say we want less traffic in the area. A third will say that the schools in the neighborhood could be better, right? So the middle class simply hasn't been able to coalesce around the issues that are discussed in Breakpoint. In fact, many people who have read the book said that's the first time they realized that these are issues. A lot of people were under the impression there's plenty of jobs in the country.
Right.
A lot of people are under the impression that only I am suffering. Shoaib actually is going from strength to strength. His salary is going up. Look at his nice car or his latest, foreign holiday. So it's remarkable that the most best informed part of our economy, the intelligence in our economy, is the one which has been least clear about what exactly are their wants from this democracy, right? So that piece has been written about by people in various parts of the world, but there's no evident solution to this as to how do you get the middle class to focus on the critical issues which matter for their lives and for their futures.
So I agree with you that, the middle class doesn't have numbers and it doesn't have that immense power that a billionaire would have.
Muscle power, yeah.
That a billionaire would have in terms of just buying a politician over. Fair enough. But I think the middle class does have other sorts of power, right? Like, for example, you said the intelligentsia comes from the middle class. In some ways, the media comes from the middle class. You have written a book espousing the views of the middle class in some ways, I think, because maybe you consider yourself at least to come from them. Maybe you're a rich man now, but maybe you came from the middle class, right?
Yeah.
So in some ways, that sort of, and I can give you some examples. For example, things like the EPFO rate. right? The employer provident fund rate is unnaturally high. It's, I think, 3% above the RBI's policy rate, repo rate, right? What does that tell us? That this class is managing to convince the politicians or convince the state, because what is EPFO is in some ways a middle class instrument of saving, right? So in some ways, and in some ways, you've also written, you've actually said you have a very interesting line. In the initial decades after independence, the middle class's grip on the levers of power meant that the government will largely deliver on the priority of the middle class. In some ways, the politicians are coming from this class. So in some ways, it's more complicated. One is that middle class, I think, has power. But maybe I think what you're pointing to is that the middle class is losing relative power. Is that right?
So it's both losing relative power. You articulated that point very nicely. It's also losing an interest in this whole subject. That's the piece that worried me the most. And in a way, if you ask me, why did my colleagues and I, put in valuable time, effort writing this over 2 years? It was that we saw a significant amount of apathy in the middle class about all of these subjects.
When you say apathy, what does it mean? Political apathy?
I think just apathy about
for themselves.
The fact that there are very few jobs in the country didn't seem to affect a lot of people, because their point was, I to have a job, no. Why should I care that there's,
Or even if someone didn't have a job, they thought it's his personal or her personal feeling.
Right. That's a widespread issue.
Right.
People's real wages are going down. Right, you tell them that, look, आपने देखा है क्या cost of medical inflation क्या है, बच्चों के school की fees, how quickly are they rising, how quickly are transport costs rising. You help people do the math and they figure out 8-9%, 8-9% is cost of living inflation. And then you ask them, are your salaries growing at that rate? They say, no, they're not, but that's because my employer is particularly mean.
Right.
Shoaib over there, he is doing really well, as I said, he's enjoying the good life, his nice cars and holidays and so on. And it was a very interesting sort of psychological exercise. And I still believe, for those who are watching, I think it's this part is very interesting, that in this world of hyper-connected social media, a lot of people feel that everybody else's lives are perfect.
Great.
I too am the guy who's completely shafted, but that's because it's me. Right? Everybody else must be killing it. I also have to go on that holiday to Mauritius, because otherwise, how will I show my face at the Diwali party?
Yeah.
This aspect of it, part of this actually, I think, creates the apathy. Part of this creates the sense that I shouldn't be talking too much about this because I'm a failure. That's why my real wages are going down. That's why I'm having to take a loan to finance that holiday to Mauritius. And by the way, next week, there's a great concert. Some star singer is singing. It'll cost me 10,000 rupees. I don't have that. But hey, I'll borrow that money, because how can I turn up in office on Monday? And I said I wasn't at the concert. Everybody else will say, well, what's wrong with you? So this aspect, that social media, rather than connecting us, is making us enact these lives which we can't afford, right? So curated images of global luxury are leading us to forget our local lives and our local issues, and become apathetic to local issues in order to enact this fictional life that we are playing, that we are seeing play out on social media. So this aspect, I'm not an expert on this subject. To the extent we understand it, we've given the data, but the economics of the middle class is so removed from the lived reality of their existence today, the way they are enacting their lives, that gap is enormous. So in the mid-80s, when I grew up in West Delhi, my parents had very little money. We were very clear we had very little money. We knew we were properly screwed. All our friends knew they had been screwed. All our relatives knew we were screwed, and we were sort of sharing our misery together. And understandably, that misery would make itself felt.
But that also gives you drive.
It gives you drive, and it also gives you...
You must get out of this
voice.
Right.
Because if endlessly at the middle class bong gatherings of public sector workers, the same issues are discussed, that we don't have any money and we live in these crumbling DDA flats where water supply is intermittent and the power fails thrice a day, it gives you motivation, voice, clarity, and from there on flows, I think, good things. But from there we move to a frazzled set of circumstances where the economic reality is grim, as spelled out in Breakpoint, but the articulation of that economic reality is confused, perhaps non-existent. That's the piece which hits me really hard, and that's why we ended up writing Breakpoint. We said we have to put our voice out there. Even if nobody listens, we need to write this book.
I agree. I mean, I grew up in the 90s, and I think in many ways there was a lot of pressure on me to get a good education, because in a way that was seen as a way out of this middle class existence that we had. And I want to come to a couple of points that you've raised. You're saying social media has broken this because we're seeing such great images around us all the time.
By the way, this aspect, and somebody who's watching who's an expert in social media should take this up. This sort of social dissonance I haven't seen in the West. So because my parents ran out of money in Delhi, we ended up migrating to the UK when I was very young. And then I did a fair bit of my growing up in London. When I go there, and my parents still live there, when I go to the middle class neighborhood in England where my parents live, I don't see this sort of social dissonance, right?
How come? What do you think is the difference?
I can't put my finger on it. I can't put my finger on it. The basics that we have laid out in the book is the amount of mobile data we consume is clearly unprecedented on a per capita basis. So mobile data costs are 1/40th of that of the UK. So clearly per capita, our mobile data consumption is way higher than what the Brits or the Americans consume. Secondly, we are much younger, and there's plenty of research which now shows that the younger you are, the more social media impacts you. Britain is a much older society. The average age is much higher.
It's also much richer.
Right? So, and it's more equal, right? So if we're an unequal society, very young, and we've been given free mobile data. Perhaps that's driving this dissonance where the lived reality and the voice have now got separated. Whereas back in mid-80s, West Delhi, where I grew up, the lived reality was grim, but the voice reflected that, right? And your aspirations and your motivations, that the drive to educate yourself, to pull yourself out of your difficult circumstances reflected that. I think a lot of that has got diluted, and it's perplexing because we are still one of the poorest countries in the world. We're amongst the 40 poorest nations in the world. The Indian middle class, 5 lakhs to a crore, we've defined it in the book, but the average middle class person earns 10 lakh rupees a year, $10,000 a year. That's second world, but it's not really first world. And $10,000 a year is certainly not enough for the middle class to say, we are sorted, we have arrived. Let's now focus on, work-life balance and, now focus on improving our home life rather than focusing on economic circumstances. So this aspect is, I think, very interesting.
You think Indians don't realize, because I sometimes think this, that we don't realize how poor we are. Do you get that feeling?
We certainly got plenty of that when we were writing the book.
Right.
So I'll give you an anecdote on that. There's an industrial town 150 kilometers north of Mumbai called Boisar. So it's my little lab. I go there because it's easy for me to access. But
it's Boisar.
Boisar.
Right.
It's an industrial town. It's got an industrial area, but it also has a commuter belt crowd taking the local train to Mumbai. It's on the Maharashtra-Gujarat border, right? And I go there every 6 months because I know the place now and I meet broadly the same people. It's my sort of time series study of middle class India.
Right.
So there's a bunch of bank managers I speak to there because bright people, they know the town, they know what's happening. So, we were asking them the sort of questions which led to the research and Breakpoint, that log kitna paisa le rahe hain, NPA ho raha hai ya nahi, kis pe kharcha kar rahe hain. So at the end of some of those bank manager meetings, right, they would say, sir, ek loan le lo, छुट्टी पे चले जाओ. साहब से नहीं लोन नहीं चाहिए, मैं छुट्टी कभी और मना लूंगा, कम से कम मसूरी तो चले जाओ लोन लेके, राइट? ऐसे नहीं चाहिए सर, ये सब कर रहे हैं, डन थिंग है आजकल लोन लेके छुट्टी पे जाना, राइट? And in that minute, right, that minute I realized that the behavior in a semi-industrial town, small town Maharashtra town, small town, semi-urban Maharashtra town, people are taking loans there, knowing that they are struggling to keep up with their finances, but they're using that loan to go on holiday because they believe this is a temporary set of affairs. They believe tomorrow will be much brighter than today. Not only does the borrower think like that, the bank manager also thinks this is not a particularly alarming set of circumstances, right? So different layers of the issue hit me hard then. Right now, I felt very old then. I felt old and outdated, and I have to confess, I felt a little out of touch with the lived realities. But that feeling got exacerbated as we then had meeting after meeting with youngsters in their 20s and 30s who have taken 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 700 personal loans. That was the record I've met.
700 personal
loans. If somebody has met somebody with, if any viewer has met somebody with more than 700 personal loans, please let me know. But the record we met for an interview for the book was someone who has.
And that's a terrible loan. Personal loans are like what, double-digit interest rates?
Yeah, his point was 670 to chuka dunga main, baki 30 ka pata nahi. Right? So again, his nonchalance on that, and to give the man credit, he's borrowed this because he's fallen in love with a richer woman.
Right.
He's fallen in love with a richer woman.
And he's trying to finance.
Yeah, and he doesn't want to disappoint her.
Right.
So on the one hand, we admire his love for this woman. On the other hand, it's breathtaking that he's taking 700 loans to finance his lifestyle. And he's not perturbed by it, by the way. It's not as if...
he's not. So that is actually what is... I mean, maybe the love thing is an exception here. Let us give our man his break. But I think that for all other... So the Masuri example, for example, is that I think for millennials or maybe even boomers growing up, a loan was an act of shame. It was not a good thing to take a loan. It was it was a sign that you've kind of messed up, you failed in some ways. You're taking a loan and it's something that you're doing which you would not announce to the world, for example, ki main qarz mein hu, etc. But now it seems like the thing has changed, again, right? The mentality has changed.
This has happened, it seems to have more in emerging Asia than in the West. So West mein there is no data that the West, UK or USA or France or Germany is seeing an explosion in youth indebtedness.
Right.
India mein the data is very clear. The RBI has actually published a fair...
First, tell us the quick data. You're saying India is the most indebted country in the world. That's
middle class. The Indian middle class. Indian corporates have no debt, by the way.
Right.
The corporate India is net cash.
Right.
First time in Indian history, India Inc. is sitting on net cash. I'm a happy investor in many of those companies.
Which is terrible for our economy, probably, right?
The government indebtedness has been always a challenge. It continues to be so. It's not a new issue. The Indian middle class, that bastion of conservative, thrifty spending, has become far more generous, more profligate with its spending. Nothing wrong with that, except for the fact that spending is being financed by expensive loans, which the data suggests at least 1 in 10 of those loans are not going to be repaid. There's simply no practical way in which 1 in 10 of those loans will be repaid. A Singaporean TV channel did a program with me on the book on this subject, and when they put it up on their website, there were some Indonesians commenting that unke desh mein, Indonesia apparently is also seeing something similar. There were some Thai viewers commenting that Thailand is also seeing something similar. So maybe it's a specific issue to emerging Asia, where the combination of youthful demographics, low-cost social media, and the fact that the lives of the rich and the famous are, being curated for personalized consumption every day, is leading to this surge in youthful indebtedness, because there's no such youthful indebtedness development in the developed economies, or indeed in Japan, for that matter. So there's a lot of research, I think, that very interesting research that can be done on this by experts who can span finance, social media, psychology, as to why is this happening. Because part of me says it's irrational for a person to say ki loan leke main kharcha kar leta hu, let me live it up today. Why would a person think like that? The youngsters in my office tell me that that's the case, but I keep arguing with them. That, who's mad enough to say that just because I'm buying this phone on EMI makes it an easier purchase than paying 1.5 lakhs for that phone. Superficially, I can see the point, but I refuse to believe that somehow the youth in our country have stopped doing the maths in their head as to just how onerous
in some way it's like the sachet thing, right? Like a sachet probably comes out more expensive than buying it in bulk, but we've seen a sachet revolution in India, right? Is it something like that?
Interesting. Not quite. I mean, you're right. The analogy is well made, but we haven't actually seen that sort of sachet revolution. FMCG sales growth.
Right.
FMCG sales growth has conked off comprehensively in the last 6-7 years, reflecting the broader challenges in the economy. Interestingly, in spite of all this indebtedness, smartphone volume growth is negative in our country last couple of years. In spite of all these loans being taken, the most common use of personal loans is to go on holiday. The second most common use of personal loans is to buy a smartphone. Uske bawajood, in spite of that, smartphone sales in India are shrinking. So
in spite of the artificial boost.
It's in spite of the artificial boost.
In spite of that.
Right. So it's very interesting, right? We're loading up on debt. As a result, 40% of our disposable income, for those who have taken debt, 40% disposable income goes on chukawing debt. As a result, there's so little left in hand that FMCG volume growth, which used to be 12, 13, 14% 10, 15 years ago, is 3, 4. If it's 5%, people jump up and down saying, "What kamal ho gaya."
Wow.
Right? And consumer durables volume growth, it spiked briefly when...
By which you mean washing machines, TVs and so
fridge,
on.
TV,
Right.
So it spiked briefly when the GST cuts were delivered last year, and kudos to the government for doing that, because I thought last year's both the income tax cut, where they lifted the entry level slab from 5 lakhs to 12 lakhs, I think that was a good idea. The GST cut was a good idea. The RBI cutting interest rates by 125 bips was a good idea. So last year, our authorities went on full throttle, giving a good stimulus to the economy that created a recovery in consumption growth. TV sales spiked for a bit, phone sales spiked for a bit.
But there's only a temporary
Then
spike.
it faded away because the jobs wala piece, the structural forces reasserted themselves. And as with each passing month, as the Iran situation continues to, and Iran situation and high oil prices continue to fester, the drag from that, the drag from AI, the drag from the jobs, real wages piece will reassert itself. But just to sort of come back to the original issue, is there some sort of mental block which is resulting in the youth not doing their maths on what buying stuff on EMI means? A lot of people tell me there is. I'm not so willing to believe that it's as easy as that. I think there's something else playing out which we're not fully comprehending.
Two things that I wanted to, we'll end the debt thing because it's important, but it's also complicated. But two things that I wanted to say that you put out in your book. One is that it's literally unsustainable because debt is growing faster than wages are growing.
Everything. Debt is growing faster than everything.
So this the maths is just
it's
messed
of
up.
The whole economy. Right? You don't have to be an economist to figure out if household debt per capita 21-22% पे grow कर रहा है. The economy is growing at half that rate. Household incomes aren't growing at a third of that rate. तो कुछ रहेगा नहीं. The whole country will
and
be...
this is very disastrous because India's model till now, and maybe many developing countries' model now, is to finance your country's development using middle class savings.
Yeah.
Right. In fact,
So the RBI again, credit to the RBI. They are highlighting every 6 months. They have something called the Financial Stability Review. So they're highlighting every 6 months issues around this whole gamut of complex subjects. So more specifically, RBI is saying that net household savings rate. Net household savings means savings minus borrowings divided by income. That net number hit a 50-year low in 2023.
That's terrifying.
So जहाँ पे 1977 पे था, वहाँ पे चला गया. And then it's bumped up a little bit. It's a little off the 50-year low, but it's not gone up by much. So household savings are a serious challenge, which then obviously jacks up the cost of capital in the country, right? अगर households के पास savings नहीं है, so it's very difficult to drive economic growth. You effectively then reliant on foreigners to pump money into your...
And they're also not coming, right? Net FDI is practically zero.
Right. So if you go to most of the high street banks today, they're gasping for deposits. So a lot of people jump up and down saying, "Dekho, stock market mein kitna flow aa raha hai." But the stock market flow is only a small amount of that is primary capital to drive economic growth. Stock market is largely you and me trading bits of paper. A smidgen of the money in the stock market is going into the...
Is being invested into a company.
Right. Whereas the banking system on a daily basis is injecting money into the lives of people and companies, driving economic growth. So the banking system is struggling to get deposits, which it is, and speak to a local bank manager, he'll give you more color on this. तो अगर आपका banking system में पैसा नहीं आ रहा है, so you're not going to be driving much development by jacking up the stock market to high valuations.
I want to come to the stock market here because again, there's something that at least millennial kids were told that you should invest in the stock market, that's where you should put your money in, etc. But over the last few years, the Indian stock market has, at least especially if you measure it in dollar terms, has given terrible returns. In fact, recently there was a survey of foreign investment managers which said that the Indian stock market is the least preferred in the world. We beat Indonesia.
Stock markets, to be fair,
have we lost that saving outlet too, at least for the near future?
So stock markets wax and wane, right? So whether it's the American stock market, the Indian stock market, they'll go through a few good years, they'll go through a few rough years, and it was ever thus. So I remember growing up in Delhi in the 80s, there was a big stock market boom. So I used to travel home in DTC buses. I remember every week the bus shelter ke upar, a new IPO would be advertised.
Right.
And me being this desperate middle class kid from a house with no money, I used to ask my parents, why don't you invest in these bloody things and make some money for us? But my dad said, utna paisa bhi nahi hai hamare paas, wo IPO lene ka. So 80s had a terrific boom. In fact, the stock market booms, which culminated, climaxed in the Harshad Mehta scam of 93, remains India's most frenetic stock market boom. I think that 13 or 15-year CAGR, Shoaib, of that boom was 22-23%, or unprecedented, 22-23%, right? So a lot of my Bong relatives in Kolkata got mighty excited by that.
Right.
So they took their life savings and slammed it into the market right at the top of the Harshad Mehta boom. And then from 93 to 2003, zero returns from the stock market, right? Then 2003 to 7, strong boom, right, across the world, the pre-global financial crisis boom. From December 2007 to Jan 14, again zero, right? So this has this.
So you're basically saying that what the slowdown that we're seeing now might not be the last word.
Yes,
it's
there will
an
be
up
ups
and downs.
Yeah, we'll probably have a few more rough quarters in the stock market. But the beautiful thing about this piece, right, is India has very low correlation with the American market. Barring GFC and barring COVID, the two markets have never simultaneously corrected. So the simple thing that...
Sorry, by GFC you mean the financial crisis?
Barring the financial crisis in 2008 and barring 2020, COVID, India and America have never had a simultaneous crash. Right? So sometimes they get slammed, sometimes we get slammed. They have their issues, we have our issues, but our issues are different. Right? So for example, demonetization was specific to us. Electing Trump was specific to them, right? Fighting Russia, America intervening in the Russia-Ukraine war was specific to them. But Yes Bank and DHFL and all of those lenders going into trouble in 2018 was specific to us. So because the two countries are very different, a simple thing to do, if a millennial wants to do this, a simple thing to do, and it's actually quite easy to do these days, is put half your equity investments in India, put half your equity investments in America, right? Go 50-50. That way, you won't have to go through these long fallow periods where the market gives you zero, right? America also has long fallow periods. India also has long fallow periods, but those periods very rarely overlap, right? So कभी यहाँ पे पिटाई, वहाँ पे कमाई, कभी वहाँ पे पिटाई, यहाँ पे कमाई. So going 50-50 gives you, for lack of a better phrase, going 50-50, India, America gives you double engine compounding.
Right. Let's go back to the engine of middle class wealth, which was in some ways education, right? But now we are seeing that in a way that compact that the middle class had, that you work hard, you get a good education, and then you get a good job, right? That was in a way your ticket. In some ways, Indians actually have a very unusual system where we waste years of our 20s studying for these exams, studying for competitive exams, studying for the IS exam. I think we're the only thing where we take a drop for IIT joint and so on. But the compact was if you did get into good college.
It's really brainwashing. So the French philosopher from the 60s, famous guy, Louis Althusser.
Right.
So he explained that the way countries are run, any country, is run by two types of propaganda. So one is this, the propaganda that the state imparts that if you behave like this, then you constitute a good citizen, and that's the.
And then you'll be rewarded.
You'll be rewarded, right? So for decades now, at least since I was the 5 decades I've been on this planet, it's been drilled into us that we should study hard, we should give these competitive exams, and even though there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that we might get somewhere, that's our best hope of achieving something in life. And if you have to give those exams 10 times in 10 years, then so be it, right? And obviously, hundreds of millions of us, perhaps billions of us, have drunk that Kool-Aid. And I've met lots of people who sit for the UPSC as many times as is possible before there's, I think, an age limit, 32 ke baad allow nahi karte. But they don't think anything of it. They think this is the way it should be because the propaganda has been hammered in so hard that yahi aapko.
But is even this compact breaking down? Like, for example, if you look at, engineering colleges in India, top engineering colleges, the wages have not grown for the last 15 years. The starting salaries what companies on campus would come and offer.
Yeah, so interesting.
It's quite remarkable.
So the people who are watching the Scroll podcast, this compact might be breaking down for them because that Louis Althusser wala brainwashing that sit for these mass entrance exams is your destiny in life, and your worth is measured by your success in these mass entrance exams. Maybe for the Scroll audience, that compact is breaking down, because the Scroll audience, I think, might be saying there's surely more to life than these exams. But for the strata of India below 5 lakhs, which is 90% of the country, I don't think it's breaking down.
But now you're outside the middle, your definition of middle class.
Yeah, so in the 5 lakhs and below category, this is very much their goal in life, to crack these exams and to make it into that one person who gets a seat out of 1,000. But the people watching, I think they're increasingly realizing that this is a mug's game, that you might as well buy a lottery ticket, right? And in fact, I did the maths. You're more likely to win the Maharashtra state lottery than to land a seat in one of these entrance exams. And I'm not even counting the cost of the years of slog you have to put in. What's also interesting now, just to turn the issue on the other side, right? Where are we seeing the silver linings emerge, right? So the crux of Breakpoint from an investor's perspective is the Indian economy. The post-91 model is breaking in front of us. We are, I think, broadly done with the post-91 model. वो पढ़ाई लिखाई करके jobs, salary promotion, that story is dead. So what is the new India going to do? So 3 things are actually emerging quite nicely, Shoaib, and it gives me a lot of optimism for the future. पहला है gig jobs. White collar gig jobs are increasingly common, doable. It doesn't involve your commuting through some 1 hour of...
Can you give me an example of a white collar gig job?
So for example, there's a site called Upwork, right? It's a global site. So every evening, it's an American run site. So every evening, India time, thousands of gig jobs are uploaded there. So you might get a gig there to say, Sweden में किसी hospital chain को, they want to build their CRM, right? Or they want to take their 10 years of phone call data, get that trained into a bot, and create a bot so that a human being in Sweden labor shortage hai, a human being doesn't have to...
There could be software gig work, for example.
Or a Bangladeshi biscuit company might need someone to manage their social media handle, right? And what we are seeing is India is by far the most likely place that some dude sitting in Dehradun or Durgapur will sit in his bedroom and do this gig for a few $1,000s a month, perhaps $1,000 a week, right? And there's a variety of gigs available. And it's relatively clear that India is the lowest cost country for doing these gigs around cleaning data, training bots, managing social media, right? So I think we will become the world hub for that. Effectively,
Except isn't this highly targeted for disruption with AI? At least the example that you are giving.
So the disruption is actually AI. So what AI is allowing a programmer based in Durgapur or Coimbatore to do is, he or she can do the work of 5 coders sitting in her bedroom. Provided she knows what she's doing, she can build a CRM app for a Swedish hospital company or a Tanzanian restaurant chain just by herself, sitting in her bedroom in Nagpur, Dehradun, wherever it is, right? So they don't have to put in the hours of slog traffic, going up and down in urban traffic, pay the high cost of living in Gurgaon or Bombay or Bangalore. And they can work as much or as little as they choose to. So this new type of gig work, effectively the post-91 IT software ka model, but in a disaggregated cottage industry format is, I think, emerging in front of us, right? It spells bad news for our IT services giants, but I think it spells good news for Indian white-collar workers who wanted a better life than the daily grind on Bangalore ka orbital road to some tech park where you spend 10 hours a day, then you spend 1.5 hours back on the Bangalore ka ORR ka traffic.
But say you are a mid-level manager in that company, would you want to go from there and
So I don't think these guys, a lot of them are our clients. We ended up speaking to a lot of them whilst writing Breakpoint. It's relatively clear that their futures are going to get disrupted. It's relatively clear that many of them are voluntarily disrupting themselves and building these new lives, usually in lower cost cities than a Gurgaon or a Bangalore or a Bombay. And it's relatively clear that this is a doable thing, right? Now we'll have to see how this evolves. One hypothesis I have is the gig work world the payoffs will be Wimbledon-esque. You'll have the Novak Djokovic's and the Virat Kohli's of the world of gig work. And then you'll have the Ranji Trophy batter who gets paid a few lakhs a year for doing much the same thing that Virat Kohli is doing. But he's not going to get the star salary. I think it's also possible that in gig work your income will be more volatile. You'll have a few great years where you'll be getting as many social media management contracts for FMCG companies as you can possibly manage. And you might go through a fallow period when nobody wants you. So you'll have to create buffers for yourself. And it's also possible that this world will end up getting ranked just like professional tennis or professional badminton. There'll be a ranking of social media managers for FMCG companies. There'll be a global top of the pops. Right? Shoaib ne kaisa kiya hai, Saurabh ne kaisa kiya hai, and our careers, our reputations will be ranked on a daily basis. So there will be businesses, large businesses built around coordinating this whole ecosystem of activity. So ye pehla big area of optimism hai. Second is, as the rupee heads towards 100, as India signs these FTAs with developed countries, and as the West and China get locked into an increasingly antagonistic relationship, it's clear that Indian manufacturing exports are taking off for the first time since independence. So from the time I was born till now, every prime minister has tried to boost exports. But that's been a futile endeavor because our IT services exports of $350 billion meant that we had an overvalued currency. Our currency was roughly 10% overvalued, which meant it was simply not possible for us to compete with Vietnam, Bangladesh, China, etc. But that issue is now fading away as IT services itself fades away. The overvalued currency, I think, will become a thing of the past. With the FTAs with China +1, there's a really good chance that we are seeing the beginnings of a extended renaissance in Indian manufacturing exports.
And that's quite optimistic, sort of, because right now we aren't seeing any numbers, right?
So the numbers actually...
Our manufacturing is actually falling.
There's a bunch of manufacturing companies I've been tracking for last decade in Coimbatore, Ludhiana, NCR, Pune, Baroda. And their numbers have perked up nicely. At one level, it's obvious, right? If the rupee gets hammered 12% in a year, then, and remember the RMB is strengthened by, I think, 6% in this time. So, 18% ka gap, we've closed around a fifth of the gap with China. Plus, from Jan 26, we get parity with Bangladesh on tariffs. Bangladesh's textile exports are 45 billion, India ka 15 billion hai, right? So
because Bangladesh comes up on the income.
LDC, they get classified by Europe as a less developed country. So usko 12% less tariff milta hai.
Right.
From January, we will also get that. We'll get parity on the deal with Bangladesh. So textile export, the textile manufacturers are some of their buoyancy today, their optimism today is some of the strongest I've seen in my career. So the whole structure of the Indian economy, where we would export IT services and use that to have burgers and vegetarian thalis, and the vegetarian thali chain would sell itself for some crazy multiple.
Right.
Wo story, I think, fade ho jayega. Neither will the IT services industry have this sort of muscle, nor will the consumption economy be able to flourish like this. Right? As we going back to the RBI data, the sort of net household savings RBI is showing is simply not sustainable. So either if the savings are to go up, consumption has to, by definition, come down. So the structure of the economy, I think, goes through a profound change, and that change is playing out in front of us. Right? Seldom are these structural changes peaceful. So America today and America 30 years ago, night and day difference in the structure of the economy. Ditto for China. India is still plodding along on the 91 model. That 91 model is breaking in front of us. White collar work is shifting from office to gig. The main driver of exports is shifting, I would submit to you, from IT services to manufacturing. And the third big shift I'm seeing is because of the fiscal pressures, which are actually clearer to us in the bond market in Mumbai than perhaps in the data that's published as part of the union budget. Because of the fiscal pressure.
Explain, what are the fiscal pressures?
So the amount of money that the government has to borrow in the bond market is rising rapidly.
Right.
And for the last couple of years...
So the government is basically taking money from the market on loan.
Yeah, the world over, people don't want to pay taxes.
Right.
So whether you're in UK or Sweden or India, the rich are decamping as quickly as possible. The ultra rich are decamping to places like Dubai and Switzerland. The large global investors are also decamping. They're saying we're not going to pay capital gains tax. And the FDI community is looking for the sweetest deal possible in tax havens like Ireland or some Ireland in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, so that they don't have to pay any corporate tax, right? So this is a common challenge the world over. In fact, there's a guy who lives in Delhi called Rana Dasgupta. He's written a brilliant book on this.
Right.
That the state's ability to tax the world over is increasingly compromised.
Because of migration.
Because of money, capital mobility.
Right,
capital and labor mobility for the elite. The elite can move their labor and everybody can move their capital. Secondly, the commanding heights of the modern economy are no longer steel plants and power plants, right? It is the tech giants. And the tech giants actually now have more coercive power than the state itself. So, for example, many occasions I've had people using fake social media accounts in my name and trying to steal money.
Right.
So going to the local police station has proved to be a completely futile activity because they're saying, "Hum kya kare?" So you have to go to Meta,
Facebook or whatever.
Alphabet, and saying, "Boss, help me out. These people they've stolen they've taken my picture, my name, and they're defrauding the public. Please shut the account down." So both the ability to collect tax, when you pay for an AI token, it's effectively a tax only. Right? When you pay for a license fee on a daily office software, it's a tax only.
It's a sort of tax.
Right? So the ability to collect tax and the ability to exert coercive power is migrating from the state to these global tech giants, right? Taxation, the conventional taxation increasingly is hard. And final piece is as office jobs are replaced by gig jobs, and that too global gig jobs, even the TDS construct,
Tax deducted source, right?
that construct comes under pressure. Because if it's a Swedish biscuit company that's paying a worker in Bangalore for managing their social media account, the worker in Bangalore might say, "I've opened an account in Dubai. Can you pay my monthly fee there?" Obviously, you're hoping the worker will then disclose in her tax returns that I get paid.
But it's a hope. Unlike if it was if she were employed at TCS in Bangalore, then you've got it, right?
So, bada change hai. The result of that is, I think, across the world, and I can see it in the UK, I can see it here, the state is pulling back. They're saying, "We don't have the money to give you healthcare." So my mom is in her 70s, she has a serious illness. The British government is barely able to treat her illness properly. So she has to turn to the private sector, even in the UK. Same thing in our country, right? I doubt too many Scroll podcast watchers are getting themselves treated at government hospitals. I think the education system will also end up getting privatized.
I think it already has, if anything,
Right. There are private security guards outnumber cops by a ratio of 4:1.
Wow.
Right. I think most people watching this podcast will have a water filter for home. I don't think they'll be drinking straight from the tap. So pani bhi aap hi kar rahe ho. In the city you live in, having an air purifier is...
But that's a very India thing. I think what you're describing, is it global? Like basic services are still...
So healthcare, so the Western world, obviously, because they're richer, they're going down the slope slowly. In our country, because we are poorer, we are going down the slope fast.
I mean, healthcare, fine, that's a complex thing. But things like air, water, security, usually are still seen to be things that the state delivers, right?
And I can make money here from this.
Right.
So as the state pulls back, the private sector will provide all of these. So
I mean, India, it seems like the state never pulled in, right? Like,
no, when I was
because I've never had tap water.
I lived in socialist India, 80s.
Right.
The state was pulled in mightily. I used to watch state programs. I used to watch state government programs. I used to go on a DTC bus, state bus mein main jata tha. My parents used to save through something called National Savings Certificate.
Yeah.
So we used to live in a DDA flat. So we were pretty state. My dad used to work for a public sector undertaking, right? So we were pretty state in the 80s. In circa 2026, we are half state. I would submit to you that if you end up hosting me for a podcast 10 years hence, right? Agar aap 10 saal baad mujhse baat karoge, there will be very little state. It'll be all private sector. So that's a scope for us to make money. So 3 ways I think we can rebuild our lives. Pehla hai gig work, white collar gig work. Dusra hai manufactured exports. In my case, I'm not only putting money in manufactured exports here, I'm also going to the Western world. We built a business in the West, investing in companies in the West, in East Asia. Or teesra hai back home in India, as the state pulls back, essential services will be provided by the private sector, and we can make money investing in that. We can also make money providing gig services to private schools, hospitals, diagnostic labs, security companies, so on and so forth.
So basically you're saying there will be disruption, but it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah,
there are ways out.
Yeah, we'll have to think our way through it. But the wo subah utho brainlessly, joint entrance exam ke liye padhai karo, try to get into some college and then turn up for some interview and then job milne ke baad salary, bonus, promotion. and then फिर एक 2-bedroom flat खरीद लो in some suburb of a big city.
You think that world is
That
dead?
world is shattered, gone.
One thing when you spoke about migration,
हाँ जी.
both capital as well as labor, right? One thing that I keep on seeing on social media, and I think it sort of exemplifies middle class anger or disillusionment, people will say leave India. इंडिया में कुछ नहीं
वो
रहा,
तो I think जब से पैदा
आप चले जाओ बाहर.
जब से to be fair I've been hearing this for last 40 years. Is always
But don't you think it's got exacerbated? It's gotten
it goes
more
in cycles. When the economy is roaring and there's plenty of jobs,
Right.
then people, we all of us fundamentally want to live here, right?
Except you're saying this is not a cycle. You're saying this is the end of an era where the old middle class way has ended.
Yeah, so we're ending one era, we're beginning a new era. Even in the new era, there'll be ups and downs. There will be winners and losers. And even in the new era, when the economy flourishes and there's livelihoods become easier, this whole angst about running away will diminish. It'll never entirely go away, because even if the per capita income gap between India and the West were to close from, it is now what, 20s to 1, right? Western per capita incomes in the big Western cities is 20x that of the big cities in our country. Even if the gap was to close to 10:1, there'll be some people who say that, look, I really need to go to the British Library every third day for my fix on, the German philosophers, right? तो वो तो आपको इंडिया में मिलने वाला है नहीं, right? So there will be some people who, for lifestyle reasons, choose to decamp to Western places. But for the majority of us who enjoy living here, who cherish the opportunity to see this fascinating country change in front of our eyes, I think as long as we believe we have a stake in the system, we have a place in the system, and it's incumbent on all of us to play a little piece, right? I'm trying my best through whatever modest means I have to create a space for others in the system. Because if we don't pull the youth into this system, right, it doesn't necessarily mean I have to employ them with some 10 lakhs a year job. But if we don't play our part in pulling 80 lakhs per annum of kids coming into the university system, if we don't pull them into the economic system, then we can't then complain if the youth rebel.
I'll tell you one thing. So I completely agree that I think migration to the West is old. Like, I think it's probably like...
By the way, we no longer have to migrate. If you indeed want to work for a Western company,
you can just gig work.
You can gig it out, yeah.
Except you'll be in India still. So which is, I think, in some ways... But I think what is new is, and I think this is really coming up, is people are migrating to Vietnam, Thailand, in some cases Sri Lanka. Right? In some cases, these countries would have been seen as peer countries in the 90s.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason...
Yeah. I think that's a fascinating subject. It's a longer subject. I'm happy to come back and have that debate. It's a subject I've thought long about, that why is it that Sri Lanka, India and Sri Lanka were in parity on per capita income in 87, 88. Now Sri Lanka has twice the per capita income of us, right? And it feels like that as well, right? And the drivers of India and Sri Lanka, India falling so far behind Sri Lanka, are fascinating, and I think they merit a separate podcast.
I'm going to ask you one final question, Saurabh. So you said that the middle class is it's in a crisis, it's in a break point, but it's not realizing it as a group. I would like to push back on it a little bit. We've seen, I think at least over the past year, social media anger, and right now we saw protests which were led largely by the middle class on education, on employment, right? So do you think that some of this is what you were describing in the book is now changing? There is a sort of, almost you could say, quote unquote, class consciousness where the middle class is saying that we're getting bambooed. We must at least hold someone to account.
I'm a data-driven person. I'm an economist by training. I earn my livelihood in the stock market. I'm a data-driven person. I'd love to believe that there's a growing realization that we're in a critical economic juncture where we're leaving the old behind, we're moving towards the new, and at this in economics, by the way, this is called a break point, right? Where the old data series breaks and a new pattern begins.
Right.
I would love to believe that realization is dawning on more people. I'd also love to believe that if that realization dawns, it doesn't necessarily have to result in violent protest. It could result in fairly constructive things, such as saying, do we really need to go to university from 18 through to 21 when the data is very clear that going to university neither improves the probability of getting a good job nor the pay that you get in your professional career. So I'd like to believe that that there is widespread understanding, perhaps because of our book, perhaps because of other forces, that we are at a break point, and that the lives that we have lived in the last 30 years are not representative of the lives that we live in the next 30 years. We need to build a new reality which will sustain us in this country where we were born and where we want to live for the rest of our lives.
All right, Saurabh, we have a long journey ahead of you to
Thank you,
Noida.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Scroll, Adda.
Very kind.
Thank you so much for watching, viewers. Remember, if you like the journalism that we do, help us. Go to Scroll.in/contribute. Thank you so much.